All right, it looks like we're being connected just a couple minutes early, so I think we're just going to get started. And I think we'll make sure we're dragging things out just a little bit so we can be joined by our other guests. So and it looks like everybody's starting to come online. So first, let me just welcome all of our participants who are watching. My name is Gary Bolles. I'm the chair for the Future Work with Singularity University and a partner in Charette, which is producing the conference, host of the event today. And I really appreciate all of the guests that are coming in now to talk about inclusive entrepreneurship. Let me just give you my background. I'll do a little briefly while we wait for other guests to join. But my interest in entrepreneurship goes back easily 20 years, and well, much longer because I've been in Silicon Valley for much longer than that. I'm a serial apparel entrepreneur. But my interest in helping other entrepreneurs is about 20 years ago when, with a couple of partners, became fascinated by trying to help encourage what we think of as business with a purpose. And so the phrase that we tried to popularize back then was doing well and doing good. That seems to have taken off pretty well. And we co-founded something called SoCap, Social Capital Markets, which is today one of the largest gatherings of entrepreneurs focused on impact and investors on the planet, and has brought together a range of different elements of the ecosystem. But what we've seen, I think, in the past couple of decades is a shift in thinking. A lot of the line that the story, the narrative that we tell ourselves about entrepreneurship, and realize that especially the Silicon Valley model of this sort of breakout, we overuse the label of unicorn a little too much. The idea that there's this massive Facebook class of entrepreneurial company that we're trying to accelerate. I think what we're realizing is no, there's a broader set of models. We have to open the aperture when we think of the range of different ways that we can try to create a much more inclusive world of entrepreneurship. And so I think we're at our start time now, so I'm going to introduce my guests, and then we'll be off to the races. So I'm just going to briefly just describe who's in the session, then ask you to introduce yourselves. But we've got Wendy Leaf, who's CEO of Energize Colorado. Maria Maso, who's the founder and CEO of baMa, the Business Angel Minority Association. Nitin Pachisia, who's the founding partner of Unshackled Ventures. And then I hope that soon Yogavelli, Nambiar, Yogi, is going to be able to join us from the Allan Orbis Foundation in South Africa. So I'm going to ask each of you to just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the focus of your organization. Wendy, I'm going to pick on you first. And then I've got a series of questions I wanted to dive deeply into. We can use inclusive entrepreneurship as a label, but really there's a bunch of practices that we need to do to build a much more inclusive world of entrepreneurship. And I'm going to be trying to dive into each of your perspectives on that. So Wendy, wonder if you'd lead us off and just give a little bit about your focus and your organization.
Sure, it's a pleasure to meet you all and to be with you, Gary. Wendy Lee, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Energize Colorado. We are a nonprofit focused exclusively on small businesses, 25 employees or less, in priority areas of Hispanic, Black, women, rural, and veterans. We started this work in the early stages of COVID. We are now out of COVID response into building a resilient and inclusive economy for the state of Colorado.
That's marvelous. So Nitin, I'm going to ask you to go next. If you could just give a little bit of understanding about what Unshackled's focus is, that'd be great.
Sure, thanks, Gary. My name is Nitin Pachisia. I founded Unshackled Ventures about 7 years ago, largely coming out of my experience, my partner's experience trying to start companies while we were on visas as founders, and realized that that was an area that was largely overlooked, meaning VCs have left entrepreneurs to figure immigration out themselves. And by doing that, a chunk of the entrepreneurs were excluded from benefiting from the ecosystem we have here. So we started Unshackled, whereby we take over immigration for founders that we invest in. That means we either enable their companies to hire them or we hire them, but one way or another, get the founders to be working full time on what they're trying to build. We invest close to formation stage and then help them build their businesses with respect to connecting to the right people as investors, customers, talent, and then we support them all the way through reaching the heights of the business.
Thanks, Nitin. And then Maria, please help us understand a little bit about your focus with baMa.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction, Gary, and thank you, Nitin and Wendy, for your introductions as well. My name is Maria Maso, originally from Barcelona, from Europe, but currently living in Houston. I am the founder and CEO at baMa. baMa is the Business Angel Minority Association. We are an association of investors that invest on diverse startups that are led by diverse founders. Our objective is to close the gap of, from an investment perspective for those founders. And to do that, we believe that we need to activate more capital, that we need to bring more diverse investors to the table in order that when our entrepreneurs are looking for capital, that when they are raising capital in an angel level, in a seed or pre-seed level, they will find in the other side of the table business angels and investors that will be ready and to make those checks and to understand the difference in culture, the difference in backgrounds, the difference in education that those entrepreneurs have. baMa was launched in the middle of the pandemic, so we had a very nice first year. And this year we are growing and we are making checks and supporting entrepreneurs more and more. My background is on corporate side. I has been living in 5 different countries. I spent plenty of my previous years in corporate, working for Fortune 500 companies. And I completely agree with you, Gary, that you have to have a purpose. And why I created baMa is because it was close to my heart, right? Closing this gap and supporting innovation and support entrepreneurs was close to my heart. And it's because of that we did it. So looking forward from this discussion.
No, I really appreciate it. I mean, one of the things I've said is you can solve a whole bunch of other things related to try to build great entrepreneurs. But if you don't increase access to capital, then you've got a barrier that's almost insurmountable. So, and then Yogi, I'm glad you're able to connect. So in a Zoom world, we know that there's always, unfortunately, going to be one or two. We're going to find that connectivity is the issue, and it's always ironic when we're talking about these challenges in forums like this. But please give just a little bit about the background of, or the focus of Allan Gray Orbis Foundation and the kinds of problems that you're trying to solve.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Gary, and good to be here with you all. Really excited to be here after a very challenging week in South Africa, as you would be aware. So the Allan Gray Orbis Foundation really makes long-term investments in young people with entrepreneurial potential and talent. And the idea is to give them high quality education, entrepreneurship training, personal mastery development, psychosocial support, and the resources they need to become and university, so that they become adults who do have the personal agency to make a change in society. And we believe that that starts sort of very early on. And it's really about, if you have the right mindset and if you have an understanding of how you can respond to social challenges, that you will then be able to irrespective of what the universe throws at you, you'll be able to deal with that kind of chaos. And as I say, we speak from experience, especially, South Africa has quite a fractured history, but it really came to the fore as well in the past week, one of the most difficult weeks in a new democracy. And so one of the streams of people that we've seen that have interacted in this are people future, basically, and that's what we seek to work on.
No, absolutely, and I think our hearts go out to the challenges that that the South African people have been facing, and they're unfortunately challenges that we experience here, even in the United States, and very to varying degrees, and in different locales. And but I think it's true that we've seen, not just with the pandemic, but with so many of the ripple effects, that those who are the least advantaged before become even more disadvantaged afterwards. So if we don't over-index on trying to understand what we mean by inclusive entrepreneurship, then these continuous whacks to the side of the head. There's no perfect economy in the world, and there's not going to be any perfect situation in the world. That these flaws, these cracks will only become huge fissures. So let's just start there. I mean, how do you think of what is? I'm gonna put Wendy on the spot. How do you think of what is inclusive entrepreneurship? I know, Wendy, especially with Energize Colorado, you're not just focusing on the this sort of Silicon Valley model of just trying to build the next unicorn. You're actually focusing on trying to strengthen small businesses, and what does that mean to have that focus and try to be as inclusive as possible?
Yeah, I want to thank Gary, and I want to make a specific point to a reference back to a point you made. I'm a serial entrepreneur, both bootstrapped and venture backed. So I know both sides of the fence. I'm not a kid, as you can tell, and I happen to have lived around the world. So including Silicon Valley for a decade, and then the Midwest for 4 years, and now back in Colorado, thinking I was gonna fade out into the sunset only until COVID happened. So, but to put a fine point on it, in our particular state, the profile in Colorado, different from Ohio, when I worked for Governor Kasich and large companies there to build an innovation economy. Here, 99% of our economy is based on small businesses. Think about that. Not unicorn tech-based businesses, although technology is in every business. So we don't need to just single that out as good or bad. Technology is part of what business is all about. But in our case, 25 employees or less, restaurants, coffee shops, dress shops, manufacturers. We have 8,000 manufacturers in the state, under 10 employees or less. So think about the profile and think about COVID coming to town, so to speak, and thinking about the impact that had, not just on the economy, but on mental health and on social injustice and all the complexities of the crises that we face. So here's what we've learned. We've learned, just like you've said, that the businesses that were hit the hardest are the smallest. So the question is, okay, what are you going to do about that? Okay, so we raised private money first because we knew financial relief was required, grants, loans mainly, but we'll do equity too over time. And then we've built a suite of very specific products that small businesses and it comes from mental health to mentorship to digital readiness and many other things in between. And by offering those free through Energize Colorado, we could at least help these small businesses navigate through some of the worst business cycles some of them have ever experienced. But we supercharge the state of Colorado. And as you know, our governor is a tech guy. And so he understands the role of technology and all this, but we're not all tech entrepreneurs. We are people that are business builders, and we follow the philosophy that I've spoken to you about called New Builders, the book written by Seth Levine.
So no, absolutely. And I think, again, we tend to, when we talk about startups and new businesses, and we tend to keep defaulting to a model that is venture backed, that is scalable. I've given Reid Hoffman, I think, deservable grief for blitz scaling and that sort of thing. I mean, exactly. That's one model. Sure, that's one model. But and let 1,000 flowers bloom. But the problem is, often here in Silicon Valley, we don't let a thousand, well, we let 1,000 flowers bloom. I often call them sea turtles. We let 1,000 sea turtles grow on the beach, but then we want them to actually, those that don't gain traction, we want them to basically fall off the beach very, very quickly. And so then one of the things you've done is you've said, well, one of the ways we can build more inclusive entrepreneurship is we can actually look at the kinds of people that need to have access to resources. And they're the ones that often have the most energy, the most agency. And incidentally, and I just want to point out, especially for those of our international folks that may not realize, 5 years ago, it wasn't necessarily a major issue to be talking about immigrants in the United States and trying to support them as business people. 4 years ago, suddenly we had a significant sea change in the rhetoric about immigrants. And so I'd love to have you just talk a little bit about that process that you went through, and then why you feel that's Nitin, why you feel that's an important part of the model.
Yeah, the narrative change was much more significant, and the narrative change is important because any kind of uncertainty actually works against entrepreneurship, right? So the more predictable an environment is, the more entrepreneurs will be willing to start companies. And so the uncertainty that you're talking about, Gary, that came with the last administration obviously deterred a lot of international students, international workers to choose US as the destination where they wanted to be. And if you look at the century as a whole, that's really been the advantage for the US. We have one of the best ecosystems come and build businesses, which is why the more entrepreneurial types choose US as the destination they want to be at versus other competitors, if you consider every country a competitor. And so in an environment where people have choices, mobility is easier. There are 40 other countries that have programs for international people to come in and build their businesses with fundings and visa and whatnot. How do we as a country maintain our advantage? So I think the fact that we weathered that administration and that narrative speaks to the strength of America, speaks to the strength of the foundational gravity that we represent. And included in that was following that a year of pandemic. So you have kind of a perfect storm brewing, but I think where we are as we look at trends that are happening now, the country's weathered the storm. We're seeing increasing interest from students wanting to come back to US schools, which was a declining trend in the 4 years of Trump administration. And I believe that increasingly we're going to start seeing more people like me who grew up elsewhere, went through education elsewhere, were working in professional environments, then chose to come to the US and then started companies and created jobs. You'll see more of that inflow starting again as well. I think the fundamentals that we have are still very strong. There are global wins though, right? So you've seen the global trade dependencies and how the US share in global trade versus China has reversed over the last 20 years. And so when you know that we're competing with other countries that are going to become significant sources of trade and talent, we need to do everything we can to enable people who want to choose US as the place where they want to be, for them to make that choice. And that includes not just opening the doors to students to come here and study, but also creating pathways for them to then, if they want to start businesses, start businesses. If they want to go in jobs, and having those different visa pathways. None of that means that we should not have controls on immigration. It just means that we need to make it objective and clear on what those pathways are, and then let people follow them without unnecessary and artificial politicized hindrances.
Oh, absolutely. I think systemically we put so many barriers in place. And as Arne Duncan, former US Secretary of Education, was saying to me earlier, in the past, the US has been heavily dependent upon things like having amazing schools that are extraordinarily highly rated. And we're actually kind of staying flat, and lots of other countries are improving dramatically in their education systems, in their entrepreneurial ecosystems, and so on. Now, one of the things you're talking about, Nitin, obviously, is unlocking more capital. And Maria, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about sort of the mindset behind that process. What happens a lot is, again, the Silicon Valley model is, we often have to build big venture capital firms, and they have to have big funds, and then they have to, because they've got big funds, they've got to fund lots of, a small number of big companies with lots of money. Like it's this, it's sort of unicorn building process in many cases. But you're focused much more at the ground level. You're trying to help to connect, especially in the seed level, and you're trying to also bring more inclusive capital sources, more inclusive angels into that process as well. Can you talk about how that works, especially in the ecosystem of Houston?
Yeah, definitely. I think that one important thing that we have to mention before going to the capital side is the importance of diversity here as well, right? So we need an inclusive ecosystem. Here at Houston, we have a diverse ecosystem. We have people from all around the world that it's coming to Houston. We have people with a lot of money from around the world that it's living and working in Houston, and it's very diverse, but it's not inclusive ecosystem at all. Not just from the entrepreneur side of point of view, but from the capital side of view, from the business side of view, from the corporate side of view, right? So we have plenty of lack of inclusivity, and that it's something that it's a big capital for us, right? It's a big challenge as well, but it's something that we can that the city is working on in order that we can improve our productivity and we can be a richer city for the United States. And saying that, when I am focusing in capital, I think that when we were doing our analysis and why we launched baMa, the fact was that even if we have all these diverse entrepreneurs here in Houston, and that there are so many organizations like Wendy's organization in Colorado, that we have similar things here in Houston, or yoga organization here, we have other things in Houston like Math Challenge, Impact Hub, so many other organizations that are working for these diverse entrepreneurs in order that we can support them from a content perspective, and we can support them to grow. If we don't have capital that is ready for them, this will be very heavy. When we are thinking in Silicon Valley, we think in the VC, and here in Houston, we were trying to replicate that model and think in the VC. And we launched plenty of VCs, like focusing women, focusing in diverse entrepreneurs. We have the diversity fund, we have different funds that are focusing in diverse entrepreneurs. But the problem was earlier, right? Because to arrive to a VC, you need capital before, right? You need someone that is already making the check when you are in the pre-seed or when you are in the seed level. And if you are an immigrant, like Nitin is focusing on immigrant, you even need it before because you don't have the friends and family around because those people are here alone, right? I am here alone, right? So that was that is the problem that we were trying to fix. And then doing the analysis and using the data from the SBA organization, we realized that there are so many people that are immigrants that are here in Houston that they are not investing in the early stage investment, right? They are invested in the real estate, they are investing in the stock market, but they are not investing in innovation at this point of time. Why? Because from a cultural perspective, we are not used to do that, right? We invest less in that type of markets as immigrants. And then we thought, okay, let's target these people. Let's target the immigrant from the capital perspective. Let's see if we can activate that capital in order that our immigrants here in Houston will be investing in, or our diverse community in Houston will be investing in our diverse entrepreneur community in Houston. And we believe that that is key because it's not just about the capital, it's about the smart capital, it's about the connections, it's about opening the door to the VC, opening the door to the corporate to venture or the corporate firm that will make the contracts later for those entrepreneurs. So that is how we believe that we can change the coin or change the situation.
You used, Wendy, do you have a quick point? Because I want to.
Oh, I just want to say, go Houston. Yeah, I love Houston. I know a lot that's going on there. I have a lot of relationships there that I've developed even while in Cincinnati. I think the mayor and the city has done an awesome job building up an ecosystem that is sustainable, focused on the right things. So I just want to say, go Houston, that's all.
All right. All right. 2 thumbs up for Houston. So, so, so now let's focus on Go South Africa. So Yogi, so one of the things that, one of the words that Maria used was ecosystem. And one of the things that's impressed me when you and I have talked about the programs that you're involved in is that you have the systems mindset. And I'm going to ask Wendy to talk a little bit about sort of the startup community mindset as well. But Yogi, you've got the systems mindset, and just talk a little bit then about what I picture the programs that you've put in place. I sort of almost think of almost a wrapper around the entrepreneur, helping to basically deal with so many of the different barriers, and especially for young entrepreneurs, there are a lot of barriers. So you talk about that mindset that you have and some of the programmatic elements to be able to help put that ecosystem together, because it's the systems thinking, I think, that enables us to solve these problems more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that these groups that we're talking about that are marginalized or underserved don't exist in a vacuum, right? They do exist within this whole sort of system that has these multiple layers of challenge, and it's the intersectionality of those challenges that are often ignored. We tend to look at, you know, we're dealing with women, or we're dealing with young people, or we're dealing with people with spatial challenges, etc., or specific difficulties. And I think what we have learned how to do is, or to think about, is this intersectionality of what does it mean to be not just a Black entrepreneur, but a Black woman entrepreneur, a Black woman entrepreneur in an underserved area of a different socioeconomic class, etc., etc. So I think they all come with these different sort of elements. But the programs that we have start very early on. And, you know, I spoke earlier about the need to actually identify and nurture that entrepreneurial potential from very early on. And so it's working with young people from the time that they're going, and the way that the foundation does it is that we identify young people with that potential through a very, you know, sort of layered selection process nationally. We identify these young people at the age of about 12 to 13 years old, going from primary to high school. We look, you know, they're from underserved areas, they are academically brilliant, they have entrepreneurial potential, and they really just need to be given a chance. That strong foundation of a high quality education. We give them that psychosocial support, entrepreneurship education and training, and personal development and mastery. So that's the high school program, right? And it's quite a, you know, you're going from sort of a circumstance or environment of deprivation into a highly privileged kind of you know, situation or environment. So there's a lot of support that we give them, because we believe that the person is at the center, at the heart of these interventions that we're all trying to do. And so from, we have a similar program going from high school to university, that's our fellowship. And when they then graduate from university and our programs, they become Allan Gray Fellows, and they attend or they become part of this community of this association of Allan Gray Fellows, which is a lifelong community. And if at any point they decide to start a business, we provide the resources to help them not just ideate and validate and create their business, but also then to take it to scale. And should they need capital, we have a sister entity that's an impact investor that provides that capital. So within the Allan Gray group of entities within South Africa, and Allan Gray was basically this high net worth individual, one of the kind of great philanthropists of the African continent. So within the group of entities he created, he looked at each entity playing a role within supporting, for example, us, supporting the individual. There is another entity that looks at the ecosystem and the environment, access to capital, access to markets, you know, the ecosystem of support. There is another entity that is this impact investor that looks to provide the capital for this group. And really focusing in on the business while we focus in on the person and how do we support them in the long term. And the long term is really something that differentiates the organization and our work. I'm not saying we're the only people who do it, but I think it really is something of value, is when we're trying to create systemic change here, you have to realize that it takes time. And to change a mindset over, time, we're looking at, getting somebody in when they're 12, 13 years old, and they may only start their business at 30, 35, or 40 years old. So to be able to sustain that and to ensure that even if they don't start a business, that they're entrepreneurial in whatever environment they find themselves in. Because if we think about the skills required to be entrepreneurial, they really are the future skills, even the World Economic Forum, et cetera, have identified, right? So all of these things we talk about: problem solving, critical thinking, growth mindset, curiosity, opportunity recognition, all of these things are in fact entrepreneurial skills. And it's what we require people to have in order to be able to interact with this new disruptive future. In fact, one would argue that the future is now, right? So I think that's the kind of work that we do. And we, as you say, are kind of very systemic in the approach that we take, working with other organizations and collaborating rather than thinking that we can kind of go it alone.
No, absolutely. When you talk about the skill set, in the new book, The Next Rules of Work, I talk about PACE. Problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. And those are all the skill sets for entrepreneurs. And the younger we can help to teach that, we can help to encourage agency. They think it's an unmet need, and they go and they solve it. Wendy, I know that.
If I could just, sorry, Gary, if I could just say one more thing in relation to the, is that, when everyone can realize their full entrepreneurial potential, irrespective of their demographic or their circumstance, it really is about being able to start the race at the same place, right? It's so many people are layered with these challenges before they're even out the gate. So trying to catch up or be competitive becomes this, it's out of the question without a Herculean effort. And so entrepreneurship is hard enough without these barriers, and inclusive entrepreneurship and the way that we look at it is about equality of access and opportunity. So we can't look at that as a one-dimensional kind of effort.
No, I think you're exactly right. I often say, work is essentially, humans solving problems. Entrepreneurship is about solving problems, but there's two kinds of problems. There's the kinds of problems that you choose, and there's the kind of problems that choose you. You didn't choose to be born in a ghetto. You didn't choose to be born with a physical limitation. So we who don't have some of those challenges that chose us, we can't envision what it takes to get to the point where we can start to solve the problems that we choose. We don't know what it takes to get out of bed in the morning and to get to a work situation that others might see as significant barriers. And so we have to think about, we have to be building these ecosystems in ways that ensure that we're going to be helping to help people to have the agency to remove some of those barriers. So Wendy, to that point, I know Brad Feld, one of the most iconic angel investors in the country, and has written a book on entrepreneurial ecosystems, the startup community way. I know he's on your board. Can you talk just a little bit about how you think about that, especially when you're focusing specifically on helping to strengthen small businesses?
Yeah, and he's actually the co-founder of Energize Colorado. So he is very close to the governor. And when we went into our state of COVID, really Governor Bolles asked Brad for some help, and he triggered a bunch of us that are part of his community. And I was one of them. And then we decided to build Energize Colorado. So it's very interesting. So the whole notion of an ecosystem relative to entrepreneurship, in our point of view, and Brad's point of view, and what I've learned and what I actually have done many times in other cities, especially in the Midwest, which is very different from the West Coast, trust me, is that it really needs there needs to be an organic nature to it, which sounds in conflict with, well, what about if I am not even imagining that I could be an entrepreneur, or I've never been around others who have been entrepreneurs or have had success or failure as an entrepreneur. So even as I believe, as Brad does, around the organic nature of bringing together like-minded people, connecting them to university types and large corporates who could be customers, and community foundations who could provide access to some types of capital even. I do think that at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day in building an ecosystem, that you really need to focus on mindset and motivation to help those individuals who want to build to be with like-minded people so they can see those kinds of resiliency skills modeled. Look, I'm from Mississippi. I didn't go to Stanford or Harvard. And my father worked for a company. And so I didn't see entrepreneurship modeled. All I knew is I wanted to be independent, and I needed some models to show me what independence looked like. I didn't say I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just wanted to be independent, and I imagined a future for myself, right? And I think this is what I love about the model that you're describing, Yogi, from South Africa. I mean, the model you guys start early and you expose these young people to the potential. Maybe they don't see it as their potential, but there is potential around them from them to experience and then model. So I think ecosystems require a certain density, Gary. And they don't have to be venture-backed startups. In fact, mostly no one is until they are. Let's remember that, right? You have to have something to back. And if it's just an idea and you're experimenting with that idea, as long as you're with others who are experimenting too, who kind of have a future in mind and who can share that with you. That's what we did in many of these communities. It could be in Louisville, it could be in Iowa. It didn't have to be a Techstars accelerator, although they're cool, but not everyone can get into those, right? So I think ecosystems are about creating density in groups of people, individuals, humans, who kind of imagine a problem they can solve and they want to experiment together. And that's what creates kind of the spirit and growth mindset, I think, in a community.
No, absolutely. So, and I think what you've pointed out is, that an awful lot of it is that process of helping to strengthen the entrepreneur and helping. Nitin, when you and I first talked about sort of your vision for Unshackled, when you're very early in the process, I tend to talk about you like as if Unshackled is a unicorn in its own way, which is that you've sort of hacked the traditional VC model and become what would often be an oxymoron in Silicon Valley, which is you've got an inclusive venture capital model, which typically can be quite antithetical. So when you talk about those supports and the ways that you help to identify those entrepreneurs and their ideas, and then one of the things that I've been tremendously impressed by, as you've asked me to help mentor some of your investees, is the support that you bring them and helping them to strengthen that business. So talk a little bit about sort of that model and how you do that, and what you would tell others would be absolutely critical things that they must do to help these entrepreneurs to be successful.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Wendy and Yogi and Maria are talking about as well is over time, just things become norms and we start taking norms for constants. But those constants were variables 10, 15, 20 years ago, and somebody was changing them, and then we just kind of got used to it and they become constants. And so there's now this thinking that entrepreneurship is all about raising a lot of money and getting headlines in TechCrunch. And the truth is entrepreneurship is not a profession. It's not a job. It's a role that some people have to play in the commercial sport. Commercial sport being creating commerce, economic activity. And so not everybody on a football team is a quarterback, and therefore, not everybody who is engaged in economic activity needs to be an entrepreneur, except we glamorize entrepreneurs, and especially venture-backed entrepreneurs, a lot more. And similarly, venture capitalists as a resource for venture-backed capitalists, venture-backed companies get glamorized a lot more than they need to be. Venture capitalists are nothing but a service provider helping someone build their business. And so if you kind of peel the layers off of that and you start looking at things at the very basic first principles level, an entrepreneur's job is take a problem, figure out a solution to it, and then implement that solution, build a team to do it, assemble the resources that are needed. One of those resources is capital. Venture capitalists happen to be one of the sources of capital, just like a lot of other sources. And you have people on this panel who are alternative sources of capital and wisdom and connections. And so when we started, right, we were not venture capitalists. When we envisioned Unshackled, we didn't think we're becoming venture capitalists. It was kind of a surprise and a rude one at that we're now venture capitalists. We are now customers of who we were raising money from before. And so, or we're becoming who we were raising money from, and founders are now our customers. So a lot of that first principle entrepreneurial thinking enabled us to, having not gone through the apprenticeship model, which is primary way of people becoming venture capitalists, is you join a firm, you grow in the firm, you become a partner. Over time, you may leave and start your own firm. And so what really kind of helped us was taking a first principles view on what is the problem. The problem was that a certain section of entrepreneurs was being excluded from the entrepreneurial pie, and what can we do to change that? And approaching that was then a very, very simple approach. It wasn't about let's become most popular on Twitter, let's start throwing all these thought leadership ideas around, build personal brands. No, it was about let's get to work, raise the capital that we need to invest, figure out how are we going to choose the 15 teams that we back out of the 1,800 that we're looking at. How are we going to attract the top talent to work with us? It's all the same things that any other entrepreneur has to do. And in doing that, what helped us the most was that we weren't coming at it with any legacy bias. Because we had not trained at a legacy VC firm, we were coming at it with what do we need to create to serve the audience that we're looking to create? And the outcome of that is we have seen pitches from founders born in 160 different countries. We've invested in founders born in 28 different countries. We have 40% of the portfolio is female-led. We have LGBTQ founders. So a lot of that is nothing but when you start from a point of no bias, diversity just kind of inclusion automatically happens. We didn't start out to be the most diverse portfolio, but we are because we started without a bias. And so a lot of, I think Maria was talking about access. Like we're a VC firm that has open access. You go to our website, you share your information, and we guarantee that multiple people on our team are going to see that. And a lot of our investments, most of our investments happen without a warm intro. Warm intro is a friction that was just created because it became a norm. Now it's not. So Gary, to your point, I think the part that entrepreneurs do best is we start breaking norms. We change constants to variables and things happen.
I mute myself. So, but although my wife does say that she wishes I had a mute button, she could just, she said to listen to me do 100 lectures in the past year. And every once in a while, she just, she wants to say that I'm on mute. So, what I believe is not enough people have the memo to understand that the biases baked into the system are so deep that you have to really come out with a completely different framing. That is that you have to step back and take the scales off of your eyes and really realize that so many of the things that have benefited those who have come before came because they themselves were often more benefited. And as you say, once so if you could completely actually debias hiring, for instance, in a company, what you would find out is you would have a much more inclusive workforce the next day. But we don't do that, right? Because we think that our biases actually are the process of risk reduction. And nothing is more true when it comes to the application of capital than trying to reduce the risk. And instead, what you realize is, well, no, actually, you are increasing opportunity by opening up the aperture. So now our time today is short. There's so many more things I want to ask you folks, but we're going to shift into the lightning round. And I'm just going to ask you for like 1 and 2 tweet responses. So this is we're going to judge ourselves on how our brevity, but our insights. So, and I'm gonna pick on Yogi first. So, magic wand time. One thing dynamically and systemically change the system that allows us to have more inclusive entrepreneurship. What's your 1 or 2 tweets?
I feel like I've said this so many times now, but it really is about the mindset piece. And I feel start young, create a revolution in education, move away from the sage on the stage, memorizing facts, just, exam-based kind of learning, to something that's much more practical, relevant, that's entrepreneurial, that's about solving problems, and let those problems be relevant problems to people, that they can define entrepreneurship in a much broader way, and let it be something that young people are excited about and are able to engage with in a way that makes a difference to their future, rather than continuing in a sector that hasn't been disrupted in like hundreds of years.
All right, Maria, your 1 tweet, 1 or 2 tweets.
For me, entrepreneurship is part of the community. And for me, getting responsibility or getting my part in the community, getting active in my community, it's what I will expect from everyone, right? But actively knowing myself, actively knowing who I am and what I want in the future, not trying to copy someone that I think is cool, because that person can be so cool, but it's not me. So I need to, first of all, I will expect that everyone will spend the time knowing this mindset that they have, knowing who they are, knowing where they want to be in 10 years. And then if they don't know it yet, at least do baby steps in the right direction, that it's your own direction, and that it's going to bring you to that entrepreneurship, or that wherever that you want to do. Because not all of us want to be entrepreneurs, not all of us want to be followers, not all of us are leaders, and it's cool to be, but it's cool to be other things as well, and the community needs everyone.
Now, and my 1 tweet follow-up to that is, when we talk about career choice, we always tell people that it begins with self-knowledge, right? The more you can understand yourself, the better off you can develop your own North Star or Southern Cross that will guide you. And it's the same thing for entrepreneurs. Wendy, how do you, go ahead, magic wand and solve the problem for us.
Actively invite people of color and women to your activities, right? Actively invite. The number 1, the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs are Black, brown, and women. So if you are not engaging them in every part of your world, your community world, your business world, your educational world, then you are missing out on the highest caliber talent and the highest potential businesses we could have in our communities.
Absolutely. Nitin, you've got the magic wand now.
Yeah, I would wave the wand and rewire the human brain to not look for affinity as the first thing people see when they see the other person, and deprioritize the affinity. Instead, rewire the brain to look for what people can be versus what they are or who they were.
Marvelous. So, I'm sorry, Wendy, were you going to say something else, or?
No, well
Right.
done.
Okay, next lightning round question. So for you personally, in a year from now, what do you want to see that you've been able to try to spark or catalyze? What will be different? Or you can make it a longer time horizon if you want. It can be 3 years, it can be 5 years. But for you personally, what do you think that you are most focused on trying to catalyze? And I'm going to start with Nitin this time.
I'd say US Congress passes a startup visa, like just make it easy for entrepreneurs to come and build companies here.
So then we'll have to follow up on this with a group of people. I'm actually involved in trying to craft some legislation, national legislation with Chuck Schumer and John and Hickenlooper's teams that we call the Work Act, Work, Entrepreneurship, Research, and Community. And that certainly is one of the elements that we need to look at baking in. So we'll follow up with that. Wendy, can you give us your vision for your?
Absolutely. One of the ways we can improve the competitiveness in our United States is to build centers, entrepreneurial centers throughout the middle of the country, a la Rise of the Rest, which is what Steve Case and his team have tried to do over the years, have done very successfully, to make sure those centers for entrepreneurship are all over, not just on the East Coast and the West Coast in major cities like Boston.
No, this is, I think, our opportunity across the board in every country is to not just focus on the urban centers. The urban centers are critical, but we also have to figure out how there's more to make sure there's more distributed opportunity. Maria, what's your vision?
Personally, I want to be able to support innovation and to be able to have an influence in the companies that will lead my kids' future. Right? It's the why I am investing. I want to that we have a say on the companies that will be ruling the world in 10 years. So and more people like me will have a say on those companies as well.
That's brilliant. Yogi, take us home. 1 or 2 tweets.
Yeah, thanks. I would like to see people seeing themselves mirrored in the most successful examples of entrepreneurship. I'd like to see our children seeing people who look like them, who share similar identities, be entrepreneurial achievers or leaders, and definitely maybe even longer term than that, a generation of entrepreneurial thinkers who can use these skills and these mindset competencies to change the country and the world that we live in. And I'm hoping that the game that we have, both the physical and digital game, will be played by every student in every school in South Africa, hopefully in about 5 years' time.
Oh, that's marvelous. Well, listen, our time has run out. Thank you all for your insight, your perspective, and especially for your inspirational work. So please be well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.